Welcome, everybody. My name is Stephen Young. I am an Associate Professor of Geography and International Studies at UW-Madison, and it's a pleasure for me to be able to introduce you to this afternoon's event. The sponsor of today's event is the Institute for Regional and International Studies National Resource Center. IRIS NRC supports and enhances global awareness and inspires informed thinking about the complexities of our world, and we provide resources and expertise to K-12 and post-secondary educators, students, and our community at large. We also have a number of co-sponsors for today's event. That includes the Latin American, Caribbean, and Iberian Studies program at UW-Madison, the Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies at UW-Milwaukee, and the Pulitzer Center on Crisis Reporting. And so we invite you to visit their websites too and to follow them on social media. Essie Lenchner is running the tech support today. If you have any challenges, please use the chat function to contact her. We will be recording today's event and sharing the link and other digital resources in a post-event email, but you'll only show on the recording if your microphone is turned on to speak when we move into Q&A later in the afternoon. Before I introduce our speaker, I'd like to read the UW-Madison Land Acknowledgement Statement. The University of Wisconsin-Madison occupies ancestral Ho-Chunk land, a place their nation has called Dechope since time immemorial. In an 1832 treaty, the Ho-Chunk were forced to cede this territory. Decades of ethnic cleansing followed when both federal and state government repeatedly but unsuccessfully sought to forcibly remove the Ho-Chunk from Wisconsin. This history of colonization informs our shared future of collaboration and innovation. And today, UW-Madison respects the inherent sovereignty of the Ho-Chunk Nation, along with 11 other First Nations of Wisconsin. So it's a pleasure to now be able to introduce Natalie Alcoba, who is our speaker this afternoon. Natalie is an Argentine-Canadian journalist, currently based in Buenos Aires, and she is currently the Pulitzer Center grantee. She writes for numerous international publications, including the New York Times, The Guardian, Al Jazeera, Globe and Mail, and Vice. And she's interested in collective organization in Latin America and how resistance and community are forged at the so-called margins. She's reported on a wide variety of subjects on inflation, which is obviously currently a big issue in Argentina, on trans rights, sexuality, the impact of the pandemic on women workers, land occupations, has a really wonderful recent article about the experience of watching Argentina win the 2022 World Cup. That's definitely worth a read. And she's also written a lot about the struggle to legalize abortion in Argentina, and that's going to be the topic of her talk today. So we're delighted that she was able to give us some time today and join us for this talk. And please join me in welcoming our speaker from Buenos Aires, Natalie Alcoba.
Thank you so much, Stephen, for that kind introduction and for this invitation. I'm very glad to be with you all today and to be talking about this. I'll just do a little quick summary of how it is that I am where I am now physically, and then I've put together some slides. I'll go through my chat. There'll be slides for part of them, and then you'll see me dominate the screen again. So I am Argentine-Canadian. I was born here in Buenos Aires, and as a kid, my family immigrated to Toronto, where I was raised, and that's where I spent most of my life, and where I was formed as a journalist, working in a variety of newsrooms, doing a whole bunch of jobs, from police reporter to education, politics, city hall, the gamut. In 2015, I started working at Vice Canada as an editor, and I did that for a few years until I got a bit tired of being just at the computer, and I wanted to get back to the street, closer to stories. And Argentina has been this fixture in my life as the place where I'm from, and the place where I always went back to, and that I associated most with family, with being part of something larger than my immediate my immediate family. So in 2019, I came here. I took a leave from my job to see how it would go. It had been a while since I had freelanced, and wasn't sure how much people would care about what was happening in Argentina. But it was at a time in which this long-standing campaign to legalize abortion was really front and center. So I found myself here and in the middle of that, connecting to a movement of women and an energy on the street that I'd really never experienced before. And that topic, that subject, that activism has kind of dominated the work that I've done here, and certainly is a lot of what still motivates me today, even though this hurdle has been crossed in this particular country. So, but it continues to be a topic of great contention in the region. So I'm going to just flip over to a few slides that I've put together.
Natalie, you're muted. I did just hit the ask to unmute, so hopefully you can see a prompt.
Unmute. Sorry, am I unmuted? Yes, great. So just to help kind of guide us along this journey, which is very much about the now, but is also a historical one, right? Like when I arrived in 2019, this fervor on the street was like, it was really palpable, and you could tell that there was this new generation of women, this young generation of women that had really kind of propelled things forward in terms of creating a critical mass around the idea of legalizing abortion. But I start with this photo here from the late 80s, early 90s, just to kind of remind ourselves that, you know, this was a really long journey that started on street corners like this one. This is in the heart of Buenos Aires, just around the corner from the Congress building, and it was, I mean, every few weeks, a handful of women would set up a table there and hand out pamphlets, you know, to legislators as they walked by, to people, just kind of talking about this, what was an unheard of idea at that point in time of legalizing abortion. Unheard of, I say, in Argentina because it is a country that was and still is largely Catholic, that the church holds a lot of sway, and in parts of the country, the idea of abortion continues to be deeply contested. But it started very small, and in fact, it started. Argentina has this annual gathering of women that is called the National Gathering of Women that happens once a year in a different Argentine city, and people kind of come to this place from across the country, and there are workshops, there are talks, there are marches, there are it's a meeting point to talk about a whole range of issues as they affect a whole range of people, with women at the center. And it was at one of those talks that a woman in particular, an activist whose name was Dora Kodaleski, first kind of put forward this notion of working towards legalizing abortion with a petition. And that took, I mean, it was very, very tiny, very, very on the margins, but every year after that, at this gathering, it would be discussed, and those are the seeds that kind of continue to grow over the decades, over the decades. So I think I'll just to contextualize a bit further. I mean, abortion had been illegal in Argentina, except in cases of rape or if the life or health of the mother is at risk since 1921. And prior to legalization, the numbers from government officials was that there were as many as 500,000 clandestine abortions that were occurring in Argentina every year. And from the tally that they had, it was more than 3,000 women who had actually had actually died since the early 80s due to complications related to abortion. So that context was what motivated this campaign to legalize abortion in Argentina, and it formalized in 2005. So these petitions and this work that was happening on the street and the strategizing in 2005 had reached a point where people came together and formed an organization to try to make this happen. And that meant that as of 2005, every year they would draft a document in which, you know, they said this is how the law should look if this is how we think the law should look. And on a number of those occasions, they would present it to legislators at Congress, looking for people to sponsor that idea, to sponsor that bill, and that really never happened, because there really wasn't the political capital or the critical mass that created conditions for politicians to want to sponsor it in Congress. But things were changing. Things had been changing in Argentina, and that's a little bit about. I think there's green, and then there's purple. The twin colors of the feminist movement in Argentina. Green representing the legalized abortion fight, and purple being the color that represents violence against women. And I bring it up, and we have to talk about this aspect of it, because, you know, the momentum that was building and awareness around a whole host of issues related to women in Argentina is kind of what created, you know, the conditions on the ground for the legal abortion movement to continue to also gain steam. So Ni Una Menos was this campaign, this kind of rallying cry against domestic violence, against alarmingly high rates of violence against women in Argentina. I mean, it's across a region, but speaking specifically about Argentina, a woman dies every 30 hours. A femicide occurs in this country. And in 2015, that issue as well started to galvanize support and send people to the street to protest, to demand not just that the government pay attention to this, but that the society kind of take responsibility for attitudes that were continuing to put women in harm's way. And that the combination of that movement and the movement to legalize abortion created this climate in which the rights of women suddenly were being discussed in many more important forums. And that brings us to 2018, which really is the preview to the legalization debate in which the abortion was legalized. But that is critical because it's the turning point for Argentina. It's the first time that these proposals that are coming from activists are actually picked up by legislators in the Congress, and the question of legalizing abortion is put to a vote. The president at the time, Mauricio Macri, he was not in favor of legalizing abortion, but he thought it was important that the issue be debated. And I don't know if it's fair to say out of nowhere, but certainly it was an unexpected debate, and the strength with which it was kind of carried forward, the number of people that came out to show their support and also to show their protest to it was unprecedented, and it changed really how Argentines wrestled with this topic. I mean, prior to 2018, the question of abortion was something that was, I mean, a reality, of course, but most often talked about in hushed tones, like, you know, something that was very, very private. And this debate in 2018 kind of dragged it out of that space and put it on primetime television, brought it onto kitchen, like at kitchen tables. Families started talking about their own history with abortion. And what became increasingly clear was this hypocrisy with which the society was living, because of course you could access an abortion in Argentina if you had the means. You could access an illegal abortion if you had the means. You could go to a clinic that would perform an abortion. You could access medication that would induce a miscarriage, but not everyone could access that. And so for everybody else, they were taking matters into their own hands at great personal risk. And so this was this aspect of it really got an important amount of attention. And in that debate as well, Argentina, or the lower house of deputies, so there's two steps to the approval process: first through the lower house of deputies, and then through the Senate. But it was approved by the lower house of deputies, which I would say that nobody imagined that would happen prior to the debate actually occurring. And that was a massive victory in terms of legitimizing the conversation that was happening. And then once it hit the more conservative Senate, it was rejected. But nothing was really the same after that. This is a scene of the vote. I believe this is the lower house of deputies vote, where this is outside the Congress. The streets are completely full of people. It was a historic event. And I was in Canada still when this occurred, and I remember watching it from afar and really just being really struck by the magnitude of that moment, and how incredible it would be to be witness to that. And perhaps some of that planted a seed in my head, because a few months later I decided to come to Argentina. I don't know that I knew it then, but it kind of set that tone for me. And these are just a few more of these scenes, again, to talk about the two colors: the green symbolic handkerchief, which represents the legal abortion campaign, and which is a symbol that now kind of stretches across the region and has been taken up by people in other countries who are fighting for that same right. The story behind why green, I had asked some organizers that at one point, and essentially it was, the way it was explained to me, it was the color. It was a color that they didn't really closely associate with any other clear cause at the time, and in 2005. And it was really small then, but they realized in 2018 that that something was changing, because suddenly it became this. I don't know. I don't think status symbols is the right word, but this important symbol for, in particular, young women. So as of 2018, when I arrived in 2019 and into 2020, you would often see women with, and you still see, but mostly in the lead up to the debate, this green handkerchief on people's wrists, on backpacks. It was, this signal to the world that this is who I am. And people can recognize each other through that symbol. These are just some additional scenes on the street in some of the many marches that I attended. So in 2019, after I've arrived, this is also an election year, and the candidate who ends up being elected, Alberto Fernandez, he campaigns on a pledge to legalize abortion, and he wins the presidency. So once again, this topic, and shortly after it had this historic moment, has is front and center in the political arena. Although, of course, then 2020 with the pandemic, everything changed, and that debate that was supposed to happen right away kind of was sidelined for obvious and understandable reasons. But by the end of 2020, that push kind of came again. And so a proposal was brought to the Congress once again to legalize elective abortion until the 14th week of pregnancy, to allow it at a later stage if it's the result of rape or the health of the mother's at risk, to ensure that it's free in the health system. And at the same time as well, this was important in terms of being able to basically achieve the support it needed in order to pass, to preserve the right for doctors to declare what they call a conscientious objection to performing the procedure. So a doctor does not, if a doctor says that for personal reasons, they cannot, for religious reasons largely, but they use this term conscientious, they cannot perform this abortion. They are not forced to. However, the institution must find somebody who will do so. So that can't ultimately get in the way of a woman's right, but it does allow a doctor to opt out, essentially. And that's the proposal that came to the Congress. And at the same time, I mean, I think it's important to note that it was a fierce debate, and that there were large protests and demonstrations against the legalization of abortion. Polls showed that it was an issue that continued to divide people. The church weighed in, different lawmakers as well. In large measure, speaking, expressing religious views, really criticized the proposal. So it was something that was never assured, right? And it is, as I say, to this day, something that continues to be disputed. But that proposal ultimately passed. So it passed the lower house of deputies, and then on the 30th of December was legalized by the Senate, making Argentina the largest jurisdiction in Latin America to legalize abortion, which is a huge which is a huge moment, because it is a region that really has some of the most strict laws against the procedure, and which most of the region still continues to ban it, or to severely limit access to abortion. I'll just end with this last slide, and then I'll keep chatting. I thought that this particular quote, this woman is with International Planned Parenthood, or she was at the time, now she's with another organization in the US, but she's Argentine. And I thought it was an interesting observation and distinction, really, about what had happened in Argentina, which is that what I see is different in the movement here is this notion of citizenry, the idea that women are not full citizens without access to legal and safe abortion, and without full citizenry, democracy is not possible. I will stop sharing and talk a little bit about what came after that. So this is the end of December 2020, and a monumentous moment in Argentine history. But certainly, as I've alluded to, not the end of the story. I mean, what followed were numerous court challenges from various groups that really disputed whether or not that law was constitutional. to begin with, and ongoing difficulties when it comes to accessing abortion in certain parts of the country. And I'm talking about areas that in which, you know, the religion has a stronger role in the north, and in particular even also in the south. You know, this whole question of the space that was created through the legislation for doctors to opt out, you know, has, despite what the law says, created obstacles, created impediments to being able to access the service in a timely way. So there are, you know, there were, and this is post legalization, and a year and a half afterwards, you know, and I say that just to couch because I haven't checked in to see if that has changed in the last few months. But, you know, there are hospitals where entire hospitals declare, all of the doctors in the hospital declare themselves conscientious objectors. And so women may have to travel to another hospital, to another city, to be able to access the procedure. And there was as well a famous case here of a doctor being charged with administering an abortion post law. Those charges were eventually dropped, but it took many months and a great deal of campaigning by women to keep that issue front and center before that was the case. And I think, I mean, she certainly would argue that those were all mechanisms that were used to kind of to create a sort of chill factor around still providing this service, because I think for medical professionals, certainly prior to legalization, you would hear this a lot, that, you know, although elective abortion was not legal in Argentina, it was legal in certain circumstances that were related to health or that had to do with rape. But doctors were never really sure as to how firmly, you know, they stood, what sort of firm legal ground they stood on. And so they opted to not perhaps perform an abortion that could have been legal out of that fear. And so that these kinds of legal actions, whether it's you know, constitutional challenges or the outright prosecution of a doctor, kind of continues to add that to that kind of uncertainty, and those are the sorts of things that the women's movement has had to keep talking about, and keep kind of reinforcing, and the government as well, right? Like the government is very clear about how it is legal and it is your legal right to be able to access that. And I talk about, we have to talk about those difficulties just to acknowledge that it's not like everything is perfect in Argentina, but it was an important change, and it's certainly one that had a ripple effect across the region. After Argentina legalized abortion in Colombia, the Constitutional Court also decriminalized abortion. In Mexico, there are several states now that have legalized it, so it's on a piece by piece, jurisdiction by jurisdiction basis. And then at the same time, there has been a backlash to it. There have been regions, in particular countries in Central America, that saw what happened in Argentina and took steps in order to harden their own restrictions against it, out of fear that green wave, that the actions in Argentina might spill over into their jurisdictions. So I'm thinking of Honduras, that had already had a ban on it, but enshrined it in its constitution. So there are all of these consequences and these aftershocks to the decision in Argentina. And then of course, There has been, how the conversation has continued in the context of what's occurred in the United States with the fall of Roe v. Wade, and how that has opened up new channels of communication and of collaboration between women South and women North. In particular, I'm thinking of women in Mexico who have been meeting and sharing knowledge and talking about strategies that they employed in their jurisdiction with women in the United States. There's been new flow of information that's been interesting to see, and certainly as well. At least in Argentina, there's always this conversation. You'll often hear women activists talk about how this is a right, and certainly what happened with Roe v. Wade is proof of that. This is a right that needs to be that needs to always kind of be protected and advocated for, that things can change. So I mean, that's the picture that I've been kind of observing and trying to document over the years. I've found certainly, perhaps part of it is because, I mean, some of these debates in the Canadian context were not as urgent as they were in Argentina, but also the way in which different societies engage with debates is unique to each place. And so here, to come to this particular country where there was this new energy behind women's activism, in a place where the street already really is this very important tool for people to kind of advocate for their own rights on any number of topics. People go to the street, and it's a way of being heard and being seen. As for journalists, all of that is incredibly invigorating and provides such rich material, because you go outside and you're, from the very first women's march that I covered in Argentina, I was meeting like veteran activists that were like in the trenches on the front lines, and that had been working, on this issue for decades. And I randomly asking somebody for an interview, and it was like this pivotal person in this movement. Or just talking to a young woman who had just in the last year learned about why learned that her aunt had died in a clandestine abortion, and her family had talked about it for the first time amongst themselves. So these things were super raw and super real and super immediate, that's what you hope for as a journalist, to get as close as you can to what people are feeling and how something is changing in a place. So that all of that for me, at least, has been a great privilege to be able to kind of observe, document, learn how it is that a place goes from never talking about something to suddenly legalizing it in the span of just a few years, and then what comes after. I mean, as journalists, oftentimes, we pay attention when there's that moment of something changing, and then we move on to the next topic, but also learning to stay with these issues, to keep observing what is and isn't happening. What are those next concerns and battles when it comes to gender rights in Argentina and in the region. So that's what that all still motivates me. I think that's what I have to say at this juncture.
Natalie, thank you so much for that wonderful presentation and for sharing your insights on this particular political struggle in Argentina. I'd like to open it up now for Q&A, and people can either put a question into the chat box and have me read it, or you can raise your actual hand, or you can put the hand icon up, and at that point, Essie will be able to unmute you so that you can ask your question yourself. Yes, Beth.
Hi, Natalie. Thank you so much for that really fascinating presentation. I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what you think the most important ways were that the movement framed their arguments around abortion. You touched on a number of different things, that it could be the rights of women related to domestic violence, the notion that 3,000 women had died, the possibility that this was a citizenship issue. But what do you think were the ones that really resonated, that allowed this to get through the legislature in Argentina?
Thank you for that question, Beth. I think the one that mostly resonated was a question of public health, a question of, and that kind of again comes back to this question of this reality that there were people that could access procedures that were in safer circumstances, and people that couldn't, and that came down to your economic means. So I think, and certainly that was the way that you would often hear the president talk about it when he took up this issue, leading up to the vote, when he spoke about it in public spaces, but then, and it's part of your question. So there's that framing, but then there's the strategy behind how it is that the movement was able to garner the support, and I think the activists whom I spoke to, the veteran activists, talked about how the key was ensuring that it was cross parties, cross political spectrum, that there were people in all, that there were people across the political forces that were pushing in that same direction, and that part of how they got there was having deep networks, in various spheres of Argentine society. So people who are advocating for it in politics, in the judiciary, in academic circles, like in grassroots activism, doctors, literal groups saying the groups that were doctors for the right to, médicos para el derecho a decidir, it was the right to decide. That was how it was framed. And so doctors for the right to decide, academics for the right to decide, lawyers for the right to decide. And these were oftentimes, Argentina really moves through WhatsApp. WhatsApp is an incredible force here. And so there are groups with dozens, hundreds of members for anything you need. And advocating for this was no different. So in all of those spaces of society, people were talking about this. And that came out of 2018, and certainly before, but in 2018, that was really, gained momentum, and so much so that, as soon as that vote in the Senate in 2018, as soon as they lost that vote, like it was about, okay, when are we back, right? Like, it wasn't sitting back. It's okay, well, we built this, so we're going to be back next year if we can. And they were back 2 years later. So those were the things that I took away in terms of strategy, which is fanning out, having advocates in all of these, in many spaces, and on the framing largely around this question of public health.
Thanks, Daniela. Thanks, Natalie, and thanks, Beth, for the question. Daniela has posted a question in the chat, which is asking you, Natalie, if you could say a little bit more about the role of Catholic organizations in shaping the campaign's success in Argentina.
Yeah, it's a great point. There are among those various spheres. There were people, and some of the main they call them like las pioneras, the pioneers, the women who've been battling since like the 80s. Some of these legends are members of groups that are Católicas por el derecho a decidir, Catholics for the right to decide, who were doing that same sort of advocacy within that space. All of it ultimately was about creating the kind of critical mass and visible support for this idea, visible, tangible, on the street, in public domain, on television stations, but having people, representatives from different groups and different spheres, but talking about it. Ultimately, it was about talking about it that created the conditions for it to once again appear in the political arena, right? Like all of that. 2018 was a response to that as well. But I think that's it's important, and those organizations, Catholic women, Catholic groups that are that have worked for legal abortion, continue to be very active, continue to when there's a case in which someone isn't able to get the access that they need, or there's some sort of legal action, or some sort of if someone has been harassed. I mean, there were moments where there were times leading up to the abortion debate, even in 2020, I mean, and even shortly afterwards, where there would be you would get press releases where people talking about how they'd been harassed on the street, putting that out in the open, naming what was occurring, repudiating it, and being very, very visible. Visibility, I think, has been a key part of the struggle to legalize abortion in Argentina. There's a group here called socorristas, which means like a lifeguard. That's what the term actually means. But they're an organization that goes back prior to 2018 that came together and to help women access the drugs, the abortion pills that helped, helped women access the medication for medical abortions. In a time in which it was a gray area in terms of the legality of it. But these women at the marches, were wearing like pink wigs, being very visible about what it was that they were doing, and would have, so that's at marches, but aside from marches, they would have like public meetings. During the pandemic, they would hold those meetings in parks, talking about what it was that people could access, what their rights were, even in a context of it being illegal for under like an elective basis, but doing so in a public space, with your voices like raised high. So visibility has been has been a key tool here.
Thank you. Any questions? Any hands? While we wait, I was going to ask you a question, if I may, Natalie, which is just, you know, I can remember seeing the coverage, the images of people celebrating after the vote went through to legalize abortion in Argentina. And as you say, though, then people, you know, there's a lot of other issues that then capture people's attention and energy. So my question is just, to the extent that for the people who were involved in this struggle, is there a sense that it is fragile in terms of this legalization, in terms of this legislation, that there are still things that need to be done to make that more secure, that it could be reversed, that things could shift quite quickly? Or is there a feeling that, you know, or that it, you know, there's something more to fight for on that front, or that it is just a case of being vigilant about the fact that, you know, perhaps further down the line, you know, there are always going to be people protesting against it. How did the people who sort of know the sort of like this political struggle feel about that moment, in terms of whether it was a real victory or whether it was tempered by any kind of concern about whether this could be a temporary moment?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it was absolutely, and it is absolutely for those who've been fighting for legal abortion, it is an absolute victory. And they don't want to minimize that. But at the same time, and in particular, and in the wake of Roe v. Wade, there was, again, a lot of conversation from women who had been part of the struggle to say, you really, I mean, this idea of being vigilant, that whatever that rights are never, they're just, you can't count on them always being there. So that there are, so it's two things. There's continued advocacy around ensuring that access is guaranteed, that women can actually get to the medical procedure that they need, because that isn't always happening. I mean, I don't know. So I can't give you of a particular case. And of course, you know, as a journalist, I don't like to just talk in generalities, right? Like, so I can't give you of a particular case in which this person wasn't able to access this service, but certainly I've talked to advocates who say that it took them a lot longer to get there, that they had to go through all these hoops, that they had to still connect with feminists on the ground to be able to kind of press the right buttons to be able to get what they needed, that it wasn't that easy. And that in that context, there are people that will still not be able to, because it's not easy for everybody, right? Like, to even be connected to the right people. That's why there are so many dangerous clandestine abortions pre-legalization, even though there was this network of women that were helping people in a context of illegality access medication or services that were safer. There were still people that weren't getting to that, and so they were taking matters into their own hands. So those things still happen, and so activists talk about how there needs to be more better communication from the government. More funding in terms of being able to ensure that, okay, in that space, so if there isn't a doctor in that town, what are the steps that the authorities are taking to ensure that there is somebody in that town? Like, should there be like a doctor on rotation through that town? Like, what these kinds of policies that actually ensure access. So there's that. It's like things can be better, need to be better. And then there is also, in the face of what occurred in the United States, this feeling that there are still strong forces at play that continue to dispute that the legality and build political support for reversal. And that can be seen through, the constitutional challenges that even though they didn't get anywhere, there were dozens of them. And these are political forces, groups that have financial backing, some of that money, coming from other parts of the world too. There's it's not a question of just sitting back. They're very aware of the fact that they need to be active, and kind of stand their ground. I think that's what they would say, but not minimizing, what was achieved.
Thank you so much. Any questions we have another question, if there are any. Beth?
Yeah. So Natalie, my understanding is that the younger generation, in particular among young women, teenagers, et cetera, were a huge part of this movement, and that was really influential in swinging some public opinion. Do you have any sense, though, whether or not we've seen attitude changes towards younger generation of men? Are they coming along with the young women, or is there still a lot of work to be done in terms of shaping their attitudes?
It's a great question. I don't know that I've ever seen really surveys that look at what young men in particular think about legalized abortion. Yes, without question, young, teenage, 20-something women, with an attitude of this is my body, my right, and I'm out on the street and I'm going to say it in your face, was something that changed how the issue was perceived. There are groups here in Argentina that are coming out of different academic spaces that are really trying to talk about the role that men have to play in changing toxic relationships, in the dynamic of violence. It's more geared towards that space, but perhaps a few years ago, it was a conversation that was dominated by women, and it is still. These are conversations that are dominated by women, but men took us back. They sidelined themselves or were sidelined, which was part of what needed to occur. But now there is this push to be part of that conversation from men themselves, right? Like to call out behavior. Usually they talk about like micro. I don't know if this is a term used in English at this stage. My language is all mixed up, but like microaggressions here, and kind of in a group context, saying this is not enabling certain commentary, certain behavior amongst men. That conversation is now happening. There's been some horrific cases recently in the last year or so of gang rape, of gang violence that brought that to the forefront, in which people started saying, because you'll often hear, oh, these monsters, and so men and women in that context were like, they're not monsters, they're our society, they are us. So let's talk about that and understand how we got there in the first place. But I don't know. I haven't seen surveys on that in particular. It's a great question to see what and how that conversation is or isn't changing. Even in the context of, we are in an election year here in Argentina where there has been a rise of a lot of right-wing rhetoric, a particular like libertarian candidate that really has also galvanized a lot of youth support. So all of these different issues are playing together in some way. I don't know that we've really parsed out what any of that will mean, though, for these sorts of struggles and the lasting power of them, of whatever has been achieved. Yeah. Thanks for asking.
Thank you, Natalie. We are at time, everybody. I want to thank everybody for joining us for the conversation today. And in particular, of course, I want to thank Natalie Alcoba for being our speaker and for talking us through some of these urgent issues in Argentina that have obviously relevance well beyond Argentina. I'm sure that there's going to be plenty to write about with the forthcoming election, with what's happening in the economy, and of course all these struggles around moving forward. And so if you want to read more of Natalie's work, please do visit her website, nataliealcoba.com, where there's a lot of her writing and short documentaries appear there. But thank you so much again, Natalie, for your time today.
Thank you, everybody, for taking the time and for being interested in it. Yeah, I think if one thing that I learned through working on these issues is really just all of the ways in which these narratives connect across borders. So I appreciate your time and your attention.
Thank you.
Bye. Have a good night. Ciao, ciao.